There you go. So there are, some people who don't, they don't know what to deal with this. So Paige is saying, aren't some angels supposed to look non-human like animals? Yes, we're actually going to get into that. Because that actually brings up a question. Because Jesus says, let me actually go back here a second. Jesus says they will neither marry nor be given in marriage, but will be like the angels of God in heaven. One of the easiest questions I can ask you is, okay, what are the angels like in heaven? Anybody?
Sorry, what was the question?
What are angels like in heaven?
Well, God's workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
That's all we know, to be all right, to be honest. We don't know anything about angels. In fact, and Paige is actually, if you're in the chat, you can be looking that up. Yeah, there's actually different types of angels, and some of them aren't even human-like. They're like creatures. And we'll get there in a second. But first, I want to look at the context of this. All right. So this is where the story actually comes from. There was a day where the Sadducees. Now, Sadducees was a group of Jews, a group of Jewish leaders who were kind of like the ultra conservatives. All right. So if you think of like any sort of Orthodox groups, whether it's Orthodox Jews, Orthodox, Catholics or Protestants, or whatever, it's the ones that are really on the extremes. The Sadducees, unlike the Pharisees, which were the other big leader groups, they only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible. All right, that was their holy book, just the books of Moses, the first 5: Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus. All right. Because of that, they didn't believe in the resurrection, because the idea of the resurrection is really, it's hinted in the first 5 books, but not talked about really. The prophets, the books after the first 5 books of Moses, they're the ones that really talk about the resurrection, about angels, about going to heaven, about all of these different topics, right? So the Sadducees just naturally didn't believe in the resurrection. All right. So they confront Jesus about this. And this is what they say. The same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there was with us, there were with us 7 brothers. All right. So he's opening up the story. There's 7 brothers. The oldest brother marries this girl, but before he can have kids, he dies. All right. Now, the first died after he had married, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So she was then married to the second oldest brother. All right. Likewise, the second also, he died, which means she was sent to the third brother, and the third to the fourth, to the fifth, to the sixth, all the way even to the seventh. All right. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had her. All right. And it's an interesting question, right? So there's 7 brothers. She marries all of them. All right. From the oldest all the way down to the youngest. Never had any children with any of them. And then finally she died. So what they're saying is, okay, so let's say the resurrection does happen, and she resurrects beside these 7 brothers. Who is she married to? All right. That's the question she's asking Jesus. Jonathan, you want to say something?
No,
Oh, you just
it's
take it
just
on
a
mute?
crazy quote, a crazy
Yeah.
verse.
All right. Here's the thing. What they bring up is actually biblical. All right. And we can actually read it. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 25. All right. And this is the law that they were talking about, the example that they use. And it says this: if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside of the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. All right. So it sounds really kind of twisted, right? Like, I don't think anybody nowadays would even think about doing this. This all comes down to property rights. All right. Because she married the brother or one of the brothers, she now theoretically has rights to the land. But the Jews had a very strong idea of keeping the land together within the same family. And so the risk was, of course, that if she married someone else and actually had children, that child one day would inherit the land, except it wouldn't be part of the family anymore. That land would be ripped away from the family's full land. So to prevent that, the brother could marry that woman and have children with her. Now, they only needed one child. All right. So once she had one child, even though she would be legally married to him, she wouldn't actually have to do anything with him. It was literally just to have that child. And that way the child would then inherit the land and keep it in the family. For us, it sounds very, very strange, but this is actually very common in the ancient world. All right. It's kind of brutal for women, to be honest. They're basically just being used to have offspring for inheritance sake. But this is how it's written. All right. So when the Sadducees came to Jesus, they were actually using something biblical. They're like, listen, so let's say there's 7 brothers and she goes through all of them. So she married them, had sex with them, just never had a child with them. When the resurrection happens, who is she still married to? The problem, of course, is this isn't the only text. All right. Jesus could actually answer this very, very quickly. And to do that, I'm going to show you just 2 other texts. Does someone want to read this one here? This is Leviticus chapter 20, verse 21.
Sure. Leviticus 20, verse 21. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless.
All right. In other words, what God is saying is that it's a sin for a brother to sleep with, no, for a man to sleep with his brother's wife. All right. And not only is it a sin, but God actually curses them. He promises them they will not have kids. Like, I won't allow it because this is egregious to me, right? This is a sin to me. My question then is, what makes the difference between this verse and the other verse? Because in the other verse, she can marry the brothers. In this verse, she can't. Why?
Because in this one, the brother is alive still.
Yes. And it sounds very simple, but this is huge. All right. As long as the brother is alive, it's a sin to sleep or to marry with your brother's wife. All right. However, once the husband or the spouse dies, why does it become acceptable?
You need to provide and carry on the family lineage.
That's why they would do it. My question is, why doesn't God still see this as a sin? Because it's still a brother and, this wife, they're still sleeping together. Physically, it's the same thing. So why is it different? Why is it that suddenly God is accepting it because the brother is dead? Alicia?
Because they're not married anymore.
Exactly. All right. So anyone that's ever gone to a marriage, when you do the vows, remember how the vows work, till death do us part? That's actually biblical. All right. We found it in Romans chapter 7. Someone want to read this one here? Verse 2.
I can do
I
it.
can do it. Oh, no, go ahead, Tremaine.
Oh, I was blessing. Oh, sorry. Romans 7, verse 2. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she's released from the law of her husband.
All right.
Oh, I feel like this was Alicia's verse. Oh, goodness.
It's very law-y, right? It's right up her alley. But it's actually very simple. All right. So once one of the people in a marriage dies, that contract is broken. All right. They are no longer not only legally married, but even in the eyes of God, they are no longer married. And that's really important. All right. So this is more than just a government thing. The fact that God curses one example and not the other is because he's saying, listen, to me, if no one has died yet, then that relationship is a sin because she's sleeping with her brother's wife. However, the second someone dies, not only does the earthly contract expire, but to me, it also expires. That marriage is no longer binding. All right. So the question is, in the resurrection, uh, who would she be married to?
None of them.
None of them. And that's the simplest answer. And Jesus easily could have said that, right? The laws are all there. I mean, the question that they ask him is actually kind of stupid because they knew that the second someone dies, the marriage is void, right? So the first marriage is void, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, even the seventh. Um, even though it was the last marriage that she had, but still, the second he died or she died, the marriage is no longer valid, which means that all 8 of them can resurrect. She's not married to any of them. All right. Now, this gets people really upset, including my wife, right? Because she's already said when we resurrect, she still wants to be married to me. In fact, she would ask me, she's like, hey, you've been married before. So what's gonna happen when we go to heaven? And I told her we'll just have 2 floors, one for you, one for her. And you don't have to live together. We're just separate. But no, according to this, the second someone dies, that marriage is void. All right, let me check the bad answer. Yeah, she doesn't appreciate that answer very much. Now, the question, of course, is the Bible tells us that not everyone will be dead when God comes back, right? There will be people who are still alive when Jesus returns in the sky with the second coming and all of that stuff. What happens if a husband or wife are married and Jesus comes and they never died? What do you think? Are they still married or not?
I feel like this is a trick question, but
I,
I feel like we're still gonna leave the earthly bodies here and get our different bodies in heaven. So technically, we are not gonna be married anymore. No.
All right. So yeah, it really depends on what your definition of death is. All right. Alicia,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, don't you resurrect in Christ when the whole thing happens? So it's like you might not like literally die, but you'll like, it's like baptism. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So if you break us down into our parts, right? We're made up of 3 different things. We're made out of the physical stuff, the mental stuff, and the spiritual stuff, right? When we die, the physical body dies. The spiritual thing, our spirit, right? That spark of life, that goes back up to God. And our mind dies, right? It disappears. When God comes, if you're still alive, at least based on if you read Thessalonians and that, it says that we will be transformed in the twinkling of an eye, right? So physically, we actually receive new bodies. So the old body dies, right? It disappears, it ceases to exist. So Philip, that's I think what you were saying, right? The fact that there is that transition, if that's what you consider death to be, then yeah, everyone dies in that sense, right? Because everyone is going to receive that new life, right? That perfect life, which has a perfect body, which receives that perfect mind, right? A mind that doesn't sin, a mind that doesn't, get tempted and so on. And that reconnecting of the Spirit, right? That strong connection, the same one that Jesus had with his Father. So in that sense, then yeah, you still die. Um, again, is that how the Bible sees it? We don't know. And that's why, Philip, you said it was a trick question. Kind of, because it doesn't get into that detail, right? The Bible doesn't actually say when you are transformed, you die, right? Um, so we don't know. But there actually is a good argument to say that even those couples that are still alive when Jesus comes, theoretically, because they receive a new life, this perfect life, that the old life dies, and therefore every contract connected to that body also expires. All right. But it's also possible that God doesn't see that as a death. He doesn't consider that as a death, but merely as a transformation, something similar to like a butterfly, right? A butterfly never actually dies. It sheds its old body, receives a new body, but never dies. If that's the case, then theoretically you would still be married to that person. Which then brings in another problem, right? Well, okay, if you're still married, then is God going to stop that marriage, or is he going to keep allowing it? Because again, that same verse that Jesus said should be kind of swirling in your mind. There is no marriage in heaven, right? Let's go back to what it's actually saying here, though. So Jesus easily could have asked them, listen, what happens when a person dies? What happens to the marriage? And they would have to answer the marriage is annulled, right? The marriage no longer exists. Well, if all 7 died, how many marriages are still legal? And they would have to answer none of them. And he would simply say, well, there's your answer. She's not married to any of them. He could have given a very, very simple answer like that. Instead, he gives us this answer, which indirectly actually gives us the same answer. So let's read it again with that in mind, right? When you die, the marriage is annulled, right? Because notice the wording that's used here. He doesn't say in heaven there is no marriage or anything like that. He doesn't say, in the afterlife or in the new earth or, any wording. He specifically says in the resurrection because that's what they also asked, right? So let's read it again without the angels part for a second, and then we'll bring in the angels. So he says this, for in the resurrection, so in that moment where all 8 resurrect, they neither marry. So it's not like, well, you were the last one that I was married to, so now we got to reconnect again. Nor are they given in marriage. All right. So neither are they automatically married. Neither did they choose to remarry, nor are they automatically married. That's really what he's saying here, which is absolutely true based on the law, right? She has no obligation based on the laws of the Bible to marry any of them. And that's really all Jesus is saying here, except he takes it a step further, right? Because then he kind of throws us this curveball by talking about angels, right? And that's, I think, what confuses a lot of people. So he says, listen, in this specific situation, she neither marries nor is given in marriage because she has no contractual obligation to any of them. All right. But instead, they are like angels of God in heaven. All right, let's get into this section now, because what Jesus is actually doing here is something that he does quite often in, when he talks to people. A lot of times people ask him a question, and instead of answering the question, he answers a different question. Have you ever noticed that in the Bible? Like he takes it to a whole new level, right? So they're talking about earthly stuff, and he takes it into like a spiritual realm. This happens with the rich young ruler and quite a few other ones if you read through it. And this is actually what he's doing here as well. All right. But to actually get to that, we actually have to talk about angels for a second. All right. So what do we actually know about angels? Well, we know angels don't look like this, as far as we know. They're not babies with wings who just sit around doing nothing, right? We also know that it's not a species, all right? And this is what Paige was getting at in the chat there. So here on Earth, we have different species of animals, right? We got humans, we got cats, dogs, cows, mice, and all the other things. An angel isn't a species, all right? In fact, the word angel simply means messenger. Anybody that carries a message for God is an angel, which is why even in the Bible, there's a few cases where even humans can be considered angels, because God gives them a message and they give it to someone else. They become a messenger of God, which makes them an angelos of God, right? An angel of God. So when you hear the word angel, and this is a little hard for us, and until you get used to it, you got to stop thinking of an angel as a species and start thinking of it like a profession, a job title. All right? Because multiple creatures, multiple things, beings that God created somewhere in the universe, um, chose to become angels, or were chosen to become angels. We know of two of them in the Bible. All right. The first one is the seraphim. I think, Paige, you mentioned that in the chat. The word seraphim literally means the burning ones. All right. They're literally these glowing energy beings. They got 6 wings. But when we read about seraphim, they still appear somewhat human, right? They got a head, they got arms, they got legs, and the wings actually cover the body parts and things like that. But this is kind of the traditional view of an angel, this human with wings who's bright, right? You kind of think of the shepherds in the Christmas story, right? Where the angels light up the sky. Those would be seraphims because they literally give out light. In fact, a lot of theologians believe that the star that the wise men were following was either an angel or a group of angels, right? Because they literally glow, right? So if they're high up in the sky, they look like a star, right? It looks like a star up there, which is why the star can move, right? Because it's not actually a star moving, it's an angel that appears like a star guiding these men across, until they find Jerusalem. But that's a seraphim, all right? So seraphims are the burning ones, these energy beings. The second one, which is the animal thing that Paige was mentioning as well, is a being that is, at least when humans look at it, it looks like multiple animals kind of put together. So part lion, part bull or cow, part human and part eagle. Traditionally, this is the same image of like a sphinx. Most religions in the world have a being like this. Uh, Different names, but they almost all have a being which is an animal kind of body with wings of an eagle, the face either of an animal or a man, something that you can actually ride. If you read, I think it's Psalms 21, if I'm not mistaken, or 19 or something. There's actually a chapter in the Bible that God rides on top of a cherub. He rides an angel like it's an animal. And that is based off human words. Exactly. So this is like a human being looking at this creature, and so using human characteristics or what we would understand to explain what it is. So the same thing with the burning one, right? So energy in the ancient days only came from one source, fire, right? Even lightning they believed was just fire, right? Because when it hit the earth, what happened? It burst into flames. So the angels are called burning ones, like fiery ones, because that's where light comes from. If it was nowadays, we might call them the electrical beings or something, or the energy beings, because nowadays we know that, well, light can come from different sources, right? You can make it through electricity and things like that. But again, using human words, what they would understand to explain. The key, though, is these are two completely different species. Both are angels. And what we believe, anyways, is that heaven is full of different creatures who take on that role, who accept that job of being an angel, a messenger of God, and work for God. So that has a few implications. That would either mean that all of these other beings, different types of beings, none of them marry, and procreate and things like that, which is a possibility. I'm not saying it's not. It would make us all, very special though, right? We would be one of the few beings, it looks like, that can procreate, right? Except when you think about the rest of the earth, because it's not just humans that procreate, right? Animals procreate. Every animal has male and female. We now know that plants have male and female. And so, in terms of the earth, it's actually not special, right? Everything that's alive basically has male and female. So, it would be weird that God would create one planet where everything on that planet, plant, bird, fish, animal, people, all of them can procreate, but the other worlds that he's created, he would leave that out. That seems kind of strange. Possible. I'm not going to say it's not, but it's obviously kind of strange. But that's not really what Jesus is saying here. What we see is the only thing that we really know about angels is that they work for God. That is their purpose. That's what they think about. When they wake up in the morning, their main idea is, okay, what can I do for God today? Or what does God want from me today? That is the life of an angel, right? That's the life of a messenger of God. What Jesus is actually saying in this text is this. You guys are talking about heaven, and you're talking about the least important things of heaven. I've had people ask me, will we go to the bathroom in heaven? Which it's an interesting question. It makes you think, right? How would that work exactly? How would waste work in heaven, right? If everything's perfect and beautiful and stuff. But I think at some point you also have to realize, is that really the most important question when it comes to heaven? Right? Is that what you need to know? Whether, is that gonna make the decision of whether you want to go there or not? For some people in yeah. Yeah, it would work that way, right? Um, but that's really what Jesus is saying here. He's like, you guys are talking about heaven, and you're talking about earthly things, and you're trying to take earthly ideas and bring them up into heaven. What you guys should be doing is thinking like angels. You should be like the angels. The angels are more preoccupied with what I want than with the day-to-day things of life. All right. That's really what this verse is saying. So the first part is literally just answering their question in terms of, with the seven brothers and the one woman, which is very easily answered. And in fact, Jesus answers that here. She's not obligated to anybody. Realize that this answer is really reserved just for that question, though. This really isn't Jesus answering, is there marriage in heaven? He's doing a very specific thing here. So really, he's not answering whether there is marriage in heaven or not. Yeah, some people think that when you eat, you absorb 100%, so you don't have to go to the bathroom. Which then brings up the question, though, and we're side capturing here, but will we still have the organs for it? Like, if we don't poo, do we really need the hole there? So there's some interesting questions. But again, is whether you have a hole gonna determine whether you want to go to heaven or not? Hopefully not, right? The main question is, why do you actually want to go to heaven? I always answer this with this example. So imagine a young girl. All right, I don't know how old she looks. Let's say she's 6. I'm really bad with ages. But let's say that little girl is 6 years old. And her birthday comes around and they give her this doll, and that doll is her life. She is absolutely in love with this doll. It's everything to her. And she even tells her parents, when I die, I'm gonna be buried with this doll. When I get married, I'm gonna hold this doll walking down the aisle. I'm gonna carry this doll everywhere I go, and it's my life, right? Um, we are physical beings first with physical bodies. Yep. But again, what that means in heaven, we don't know. But we will have physical bodies based on what Jesus says, right? When he says, "Listen, you can touch me. I'm here. I'm not just a ghost," right? Will we be restricted with only physical bodies? That's again a whole other question that I don't have an answer to. But we will have physical bodies, whether we physically need them at all times, we don't know, but that is there. But okay, let me go back. So this girl has this little baby. Now, when she's 6, that baby is everything to her. But when she reaches middle age, when she's in her 30s, how important is that doll in her life? Yeah. She might even still have it. It might be sitting on a shelf somewhere, or, even in the closet or something. Like, she still might have, some memories of it, some attachment to it, but it doesn't have the same value that it had when she was a baby. And then again, when she's older, when she's, retired, getting close to end of life, that doll probably has even less value, right? She might not even remember it at that point. We have to realize that here on Earth, we're still pretty much babies. All right. Everything that's important to us is like this doll. That doesn't mean that it's not important. So again, when you think about your life, what's the big things? It's your spouse, it's your home, it's your job, it's your children, right? Like, those are the big things, your friends maybe, right? And those are important. But realize that this is still earthly. In heaven, yes, I agree. When we get to heaven, we don't know if those things are still important. And I'll explain it this way. So let's talk about marriage for a second. I know you guys talked about this last week. Why do people get married? Anyone? Why do people get married?
To not be alone.
Yeah, to not be alone. What else?
To procreate.
To procreate, have sex. Yeah.
Companionship. I guess that falls with not being alone.
Yeah, but it's slightly different, right? Anything else?
Financial reasons. Green cards.
I was gonna say
It could be that. It could be
some
that.
people.
But if that's all it is, then usually that marriage won't last, right? I'm talking about, like, why people really do want to get married. Check the chat here.
For unity, like to help each other, and
yeah, to support each other, right? To have someone there that can uplift each other. All right. And again, all of those things are good, right? But here's the thing. A lot of it comes down to love, let's say. As human beings, we desire to give love and to receive love, right? At a bare minimum. And the fact is, sometimes that's hard to find, right? Our desire is that we can find someone who will truly love us, right? I think everyone strives for that, to find that partner who will love you during the good times and the bad times and the sickness and health and so on, and all of those things. We strive to find someone that we can have a stronger, intimate love with than anyone else, right? The problem, of course, is that love here on this planet is never really pure. All right. I'll use this example here. Which cup would you drink from if you were dying of thirst?
The cup on the left, of course.
Yeah, and that the other one's not Coke, or iced tea. It's muddy. So I mean, this is kind of how our Earth is, right? So yes, there is really bad love, right? There's some toxic, hurtful, egotistical love in the world, right? There's some people that use love to literally just abuse people and get what they want, and it's a very toxic form. Yeah, they're both not clean. But that's what I'm getting at. Even the most purest form of love that we have here, though, we have to remember we're still sinful, right? That's why we always make it very clear whenever we do like marriage counseling and things like that. We always tell people perfect marriages don't exist. The perfect partner does not exist. Finding someone that will never screw up does not exist. All right? Because even though you might find a good guy or a good girl, even like a great person, they're not perfect. All right? And they still end up like the other cup of water. Is it cleaner than the other one? Sure. But it's still not pure. And love, companionship, all of those things that we strive for in marriage is kind of like this cup here. When we get to heaven, however, that cup exists, right? Which is perfect. And I think this is what we have to understand. Now, the next thing I'm going to say might sound a little strange, but just think about it for a second. The strongest forms of love traditionally here on the earth is the love between a husband and a wife, right? The spouse. And it's also the love between a parent and a child, right? Those are basically the two strongest forms of love that exist here on this planet. I would argue that the love that will exist between friends in heaven will be stronger than that because it's pure. Because even when you love your spouse, there's still a bit of ego there, right? I mean, think of it this way. You might love your spouse, but if they stop doing what you want, not just once in a while, but all the time, will that love remain? What do you think?
I don't think so.
You could be romantic and you can say, well, I'll love until the bitter end. But there's a reason why divorce is at about 50%. All right? Because even when two people love each other, we have to realize that we're human, sinful beings, right? And that sin still gets in the way, even in a real loving relationship. And the problem is if the sin gets enough in the way, it can destroy even a good marriage, right? Now, we like to think that the relationship between a parent and a son or a parent and a daughter is solid and forever and but let's be honest, how many bad parents are there? How many bad kids are there? How many families are there that they don't talk to each other? It's because we're sinful, right? It's because even the greatest forms of love that we have here on earth is still like this dirty water here. When we get to heaven, everybody is perfect. And the love that your next door neighbor will show to you will be purer than any relationship you have here on earth. Which then brings the question, if everyone around you is giving that kind of love, do you have enough of it? Will you be satisfied with just that form of love? Now, the answer is we don't know. We honestly don't know. But I always say this because there is a chance. It's one verse, and for me, again, it's a lot of times it's used out of context, but it's still something that Jesus said, and there is that possibility that he meant it literally, right? That listen, in heaven, yeah, there's no need for marriage. That is a possibility. I won't deny that, right? But what I will say is this: if it doesn't exist, it's because it won't be needed. All right? You will be 100% satisfied in heaven without it, if it doesn't exist. Now, to be honest, I still find that hard to believe. Simply because of Genesis again, right? Going right back to the beginning. Adam and Eve were married, and it was a blessing. God married them, right? These were two human beings that God purposefully married together, purposefully said to have sex and procreate and fill the earth and so on. And so again, the question is asked, if they had never have sinned, we at least assume, and maybe we are wrong, maybe God would cut it off at some point, but we assume that it would continue, that Adam and Eve would be allowed to continue to be married, forever. But in saying that, I do want to bring this up. Do you want to be married in heaven? Because let me tell you, there is no divorce in heaven. There is no death in heaven. So if you were to marry someone in heaven, it is forever. All right. Now, again, that probably scares us because we're still thinking in human terms, right? We live in a world that after a couple of years, they both stop caring, right? And they start annoying each other. And so thinking of that kind of a marriage, we would go crazy, right? Like I would never want to marry, forced to be married to someone forever. But the fact is, in heaven, it would be a perfect marriage, right? You would actually love each other completely forever. So it's still very possible that there will be marriage in heaven. But at least according to God's laws, if they transfer over into, after the resurrection and so forth, you won't be automatically married to the person that you were married here on earth with. That doesn't mean that, maybe when, we resurrect, you'll be like, well, no, I still want to be married to that person and they still want to be married to me. So maybe they will be able to marry. We don't know. And now we're just assuming, right? Because really the Bible doesn't say. What I will say is this, when we resurrect, and I'll say when instead of if, when we resurrect, if you get to heaven and in your heart you want to get married, it's because you can get married. Because remember, in heaven, you don't have evil thoughts, right? You don't have temptations. You don't have the devil whispering into your ear. Everything that will enter your heart, every desire you'll have in heaven will be holy and will be allowed by God. And so if you get to heaven one day and you realize, you know what? I want to get married. I want to have kids, or I want to have, if that's a thought you're going to have, it's because God will allow it. Does that make sense? But there is also the chance that we will get to heaven one day, and just like that little doll that little girl had, it'll be a memory. It'll be like, oh yeah, I remember back on earth, right? We used to marry and had kids, and that was fun. That was nice. Um, but what we're doing now is so much greater than that. We don't know. All right. Any questions at all? And that's why I said right from the beginning, listen, I'm not going to say one way or the other. What I am going to do is really just try to explain that verse there, which, yeah, this is what I always say heaven is like. No eye has seen, nor ear has heard what is nor have entered into the hearts of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. For me, this is the best explanation of what heaven's going to be like. Whatever you imagine, it's going to be better than that. And that's where faith has to come in. That's where trust has to come in. Just believing that what God has prepared for us truly is going to be the best thing for us. So any questions at all? Feel free to take it off mute.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, it just seems like we just don't exactly know the answer. It seems like probably not. It's kind of seems unlikely from the evidence that was shown in the, but it's still, there's a chance.
It really it depends how you think of it. Because for me, I actually lean towards the fact that there will be, just because of Genesis, right? Just because if that's how God had originally created us to be, when you read through the Bible, when you read the beginning of Genesis and then the ending of Revelation, it kind of does this loop. We kind of go back to Genesis almost, because the tree of life appears again and the perfect bodies appear again, and God being with us and all of that stuff. So it seems to make this loop, right? We go back to Eden kind of a thing, except it's even better. So because of that, I actually, and again, this isn't just my own personal opinion, but I tend to shift towards the fact that if God created it at the beginning, it's because he's at least going to get us the option again in the future. But I'm not going to get upset if I get to heaven and he's like, nope, no, no, I'll be like, okay, that's fine. There must be something better then, right? Better than, yeah. I think I know that song. Any other comments or questions about this or about something else?
When you were talking about the angels, you were talking, but I just had a thought about the fallen angels and basically the demons and spirits.
Yeah.
Do we know how they look like?
The only one that we know is Lucifer. So if we get the wording right, so I believe it's Ezekiel, it says that Lucifer was the covering cherub, right? Now that's a very specific role. That's when you read about the temple and about the temple in heaven, God has his throne and there's two angels that make like a covering over God, right? It says that their wings touch. It's the same image that's on the Ark of the Covenant. So there's like the golden box and then the lid, and then there was the covering cherubs, all right? And the fact is that it tells us that they're covering cherubs, which is the animal creature. So when the Bible says that Satan is a dragon, based on that, it's actually more literal than it seems. It is very possible that Lucifer actually does kind of look like a dragon, like this creature with wings and a tail. And now the thing that we always have to remember, and this is what kind of twists the whole angel thing, is angels seem to have the ability to transform, to be invisible, and so on, right? So even though that might be his original form, it doesn't mean that he can appear like a human and walk around like a human, right? So when you talk about angels, it's always a little bit tricky because of that, because of what seems to be their ability. Anyone else? All right, have a good night.
Well, it seems like
Oof, up at 5.
here on Earth we have been given, many blessings that we may not be able to see in heaven. So I think it just goes on to live your best life while you're here and prepare for ascent at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I'll say, and I left it out of this study just to make it not any longer. If you read again Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, and actually look at what God created in terms of humans, and then how he told them to live. Not only are they married, not only are they told to procreate, right, have sex and have babies, But then they're actually given a job as well, right? So Adam's job was to um, take care of Eden, right? Tend the field and all of that stuff, which then brings up a question. In some prisons, they get the inmates to dig ditches. All right. So for half of the day, they dig the ditch. And then for the second half of the day, they fill up the ditch. Right. And every day they do the same thing. They dig a hole, they fill the hole up. They dig a hole, they fill a hole up. And literally, it's useless work, right? It's just to keep them occupied. My question then is this: the job that God gave to Adam, which you then assume is the job that he would also give to us, right? We'd all have jobs. Would they be like that? Would they be useless jobs? Or would they have an actual purpose behind them? What do you think?
You would think purpose. Why would they be useless? That almost
Yeah.
seems like a dumb question.
Yeah.
Like, not that you're posing a dumb question, but you know what I mean? It just
Yeah.
seems like,
For me, it's fairly obvious, right? I don't think
Yeah.
God would just get us to work just to waste time, right? But
For sure.
here's where we get an issue now. So he told Adam to take care of the Garden of Eden. What would happen if Adam didn't? Because again, we're in heaven. Well, we're in this perfect place, which we assume is always beautiful. If it's beautiful regardless of whether you're working, then why was Adam working?
I don't know.
but
Maybe
doesn't, sorry,
go.
go ahead.
Oh, you go.
I was just gonna say, like, doesn't, and like, don't quote me on this, but doesn't Ellen G. White say something about us like building cities and like learning new things when we're in heaven? Like, we're gonna keep learning.
It's not just Ellen White. She was actually quoting the popular idea of the day. Yeah, so there's some prophecies, especially in Ezekiel, I believe, where it says that we will plant our vineyards and build our houses. Um, we have to be kind of careful with those verses, however, because we're kind of taking it out of context again. If you read the context of that, it's actually what I'm going to be the Bible study I'm going to do on Thursday. We're actually going to be reading those prophecies, because if you keep reading that, the verses that talk about planting your vineyards and building your homes, if you keep reading, it says, "Cursed is the baby that only lives to 150 years," which means people would die in heaven. And then it says that there's this river of life that keeps flowing, and then it gets deeper, and then it turns into a swamp, and people are fishing, which means we'd be fishing in heaven, which I think would be fun for a lot of guys, right? They're like, "Hey, there's fishing in heaven. That's great." Um, which means, if you're fishing, it's because you're going to eat fish and stuff like that. And it gives you this whole new idea of what heaven would be, right? We have to understand that, especially in the Old Testament, their view of heaven was simply living in peace, right? Like that's what they wanted. I don't want the Philistines coming down and taking the fruits that I planted, right? So a lot of those verses you're not supposed to take literally. You're supposed to take it as, that view of heaven, which is one day I'm going to live in peace. One day I can work without enemies. I can work without having problems and so on. But again, I still believe it's somewhat accurate because again, if Adam was told to plant and take care of, the plants and stuff, then it must happen in the future as well, right? Um, Here's the thing that we have to realize about heaven. When we get to heaven, we're perfect, right? Yes or no? Yes, we're perfect.
Yes.
But here's the thing. When we get to heaven, will we know everything?
No.
No. Which means 1,000 years later, 1,000 years, after the resurrection, are you going to be better than when you first went to heaven?
Absolutely.
Yes. Perfection doesn't mean you know everything or that you're the best at everything. Perfection simply means you have no sin in you, right? There's no negativity in you. When we go to heaven, you're going to keep learning. So when you go to heaven, now I believe everyone will be able to sing, but some people will still sing better than others. And those that practice will get better and better at it. Those that do gardening, those that build, those that, whatever job you end up doing, you'll get better at it. And so the Garden of Eden, going back to Adam now, the Garden of Eden was perfect. That doesn't mean that Adam couldn't make it more beautiful. In fact, that has to be a reality. Otherwise, why would God ask them to do it? Right? If God is giving you this job, it's because you can do something with it. You can take something that's already good and make it better. Just like us, we're going to get to heaven good, but we can still get better. This is where it gets tricky because in our human minds, I'm sure there's some people that are like, oh man, I'm going to sing day and night. I'm going to practice so that I can be the best of everybody, right? I'm going to be the number one singer in heaven. Of course, that is the wrong way of thinking, right? That's what the Sadducees were doing. They're thinking human still. When Jesus says you got to be like the angels in heaven, the way we got to think about heaven is, what is God going to want me to do in heaven? What's going to be my purpose according to his will? So, we're going to get to heaven and God might be like, listen, I want you to practice singing because I love your voice. And I think for me, that's amazing. Imagine God saying, listen, I really like how you do this. That's crazy, right? Because he's God. I mean, he's like the ultimate of everything. And for him to say, wow, I like how you sing, or I like how you built that house or whatever. And I want you to do that better. That's going to be our desires. Our desires aren't going to be necessarily even what we want. Our desires are going to be, what does God want from me? And that is the very heart of be like the angels in heaven, because that's how the angels think. And that's really what that verse is saying.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about it because when you first made the analogy of like the prison in the Adam and Eve, he gave Adam the purpose, and even if you're in jail digging these holes, doesn't matter whether you're in or out of jail or anything. The fact that they give you a job to dig these holes, you have a purpose to, maybe every day you get little, you can make positive outcomes like, oh, we did it faster, or we did a different method to get better. And like, I can imagine that, we're not going to choose what we're going to do. We're going to be kind of told or directed what to do, like we're kind of doing in our own lives, whether or not we know or feel. And just like as we are now, we're going to do there, and he's going to put us on whatever path that we have.
Absolutely. The one thing that I say about heaven, especially when we talk about the marriage and stuff like that, I always say this: listen, you will never be lonely in heaven. It will not exist. You will never feel out of place. You will never feel like you don't belong, or like you're not part of the group, or all of those things will no longer exist because you will literally be best friends with everybody, which almost sounds, especially if you're a loner, it sounds like hell. But in heaven, it'll be good, right? Like in heaven, you'll be content. You'll feel like you have that purpose, like you were saying, right? Like I fit somewhere. Like this is where I belong, right? So that is a guarantee. That is a guarantee of what heaven is going to be like. And some people, I always use my wife as an example. Her mom always taught her that heaven is, you're just this ghost, you're just a spirit that doesn't do anything. You don't talk, you don't move, you just float there. So when she was younger, she was deathly afraid of heaven. She's like, I don't want to just float for the rest of my life doing nothing, right? When you watch cartoons, right? When the coyote dies, his spirit floats up, he's got little wings, and he just plays harp all day. That's not heaven. Heaven isn't a place where you get bored. Heaven isn't a place where you don't have a job or a purpose, or you know um you do have a purpose. And what's amazing, and again, this goes back to the trust of God, is because some people might be like, well, I don't want God to tell me what to do. I want to be able to choose that, right? That's sin talking. That's literally what made Lucifer turn into Satan, right? in heaven, when God says, listen, why don't you do this? It's because that's actually what's inside of you. Like that's going to be, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Like he's going to find your center, right? Like how I don't know how many times I've heard people say, Pastor, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what God wants me to do, or I don't know what I should be doing. Like what's my path? What's my purpose? What's my whatever? Um, in heaven, God will actually tell you. He's saying, listen, this is your purpose. This is who you are. And the second he says it, you're going to be like, oh my word, that's exactly right. So you're going to wake up every morning if you go to sleep. But that I don't even know either. But you're going to be like, man, I get another day of this. Like I get to do it again and I get to do it again. So it's not boring. It's not lonely. It's not any of those things. Um, and so again, once you realize that, I still like, but again, this is the human in me talking. I still like the idea that I can wake up in heaven and have my wife beside me, have the kids there downstairs or whatever, right? Like I like that idea. But that might be the human in me talking, right? That might be the little baby talking with holding that doll. Because when we get to heaven, everything is so much better than this that I think the vast majority of what we think about now, we won't even think about there. It won't even come into our minds.
I hope so.
That's the promise, anyways.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I don't think God would give us like some boring nine to five that we hate.
You're gonna wake up and be like, "Oh my word, eternity!" And
Yeah.
there's
Are you
no
sure?
tests in heaven, Alicia. There's no LSAT.
Thank God. Oh gosh.
You would
Hey,
ace it anyways, even if there was, you'd ace it.
thank you. But some people
So
thrive
true.
in the 9 to 5. So what if you want the 9 to 5?
Well, and that's the thing. Some people, yeah. I mean, I'm sure, and that's the thing, and that's why I'm saying when God gives you your purpose, it's your purpose, right? Like your neighbor might be like, "Oh, I'd never want to do that," but my job is perfect, right? Like, and that's the thing. You're finally gonna be on that path that I'm living where I want to live. I'm doing what I want to do. I'm with the people that I want to be with. It's that paradise, right? It's everything is coming up aces, as people say.
Must be nice.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely, Philip. Every that uniqueness of individuality exists in heaven, right? We're not going to be robots. We're not going to be all the same. So there's going to be people that you're talking about the 9 to 5, Alicia. There's going to be people that are going to probably be sitting down with their guitar, playing guitar like 20 hours a day because that's what they love. And the great thing with heaven is that's allowed, right? Because that he's going to be playing for God's glory, right? So none of it will be, get a job, you hippie kind of a thing. Like, why don't, be productive or whatever. Everyone's going to be productive in their own way. So there isn't that, rat race. There isn't that competition or anything like that. It's perfect, right?
Well said.
This was really interesting.
Good, good. Yeah, I did it yesterday with the adults, and they really liked it. So I'm like, oh, maybe you guys will like it. It was funny when I asked them, who is that woman still married to? They all said, oh, the seventh one. And I was just like,
Really?
No way.
no, he died, right? And they're like, oh, then they got it. Then they were like, okay, now I get it, right? But yeah, that was really funny. I almost started laughing. I was wondering if you guys were gonna do it, but you guys aced it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Hey,
All right,
we're
well,
so good to the adults.
yeah, you got them. But it's because they're so used to that marriage. Because again, most people that are married get into their heads, we're gonna die together, we're gonna resurrect together, and just continue, living our
Wow.
lives.
They must really like each other.
Yeah, And sometimes they
think-
don't, which is funny. But now the one thing that again today I only talked about the Bible, right? Because that's how I always try to do it. If you do bring in Ellen White, there is one thing that really throws a curveball. And what she says is that all the babies that die that are going to go to heaven, when they resurrect as babies.
Yes.
And the parents have the opportunity to raise their baby in heaven, which then you would assume that they're married, right? At least
Mm,
while they're raising the baby together, right? At least until he's fully grown. So again, outside of the Bible, if you believe in Ellen White and stuff, then you can get quite a bit more information. But again, when I try to do it, I just try to do the Bible, right? But there is a few other texts out there that make it a little bit more interesting,
Mm.
right? All right, let me stop recording and we'll pray.